Hi there, I'm Drew Birston and I play bass with Sultans of String. I'm super excited to be with you here today to tell you a little bit about one of my favorite instruments, the electric bass. It's a super cool instrument, and this bass came on the scene around 1951. I want to give you a little bit of the back history on it. It's a direct descendant of the double bass here that I have with me, and it's tuned the same way in fourths like E, A, D, and G. And the double bass was around during the 16th century, the Baroque era, so it goes way back. And fast forwarding to 1951, Leo Fender designed the Fender Precision bass. Now, up until that point, there had been a lot of kind of bass instruments breaking the gap. In 1912, Gibson introduced a bass mandolin to its family. And there were also other prototypes of electric upright type basses without the body and a peg and 4 strings that also had their go at it. And now the electric bass is very prominent, and there's 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 12 string basses. So today, I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the instrument and give you a walkthrough of some of our fundamentals that we need as a bassist, and also a few techniques, because there's a lot of them. And also give you a quick little lesson, and you can walk away with a few bass lines today that you could play solo or with a group ensemble. All right, so let's get started. Back to Leo Fender. In 1951, a lot of guys had been playing the upright bass and were transitioning, thanks to Leo Fender, to the Fender Precision bass. This is a 1978 that I have with me today. Not quite as old as the 51, but I really enjoy it. And so in 1951, Leo Fender made his way to New York City and other parts of the States. And with him, he was bringing the Fender Precision bass, and he brought a Fender Basement amp and visited New York City, where Lionel Hampton was playing with his big band. Now, he gave a bass to Roy Johnson, the bass player at the time, said, try it out in a few gigs, and Lionel Hampton loved it. So from that point on in his band, the electric bass took over from its brother, the upright bass, and made its permanent home in Lionel's band. And Montgomery, who's Wes Montgomery's brother, took over for him in the band and continued to play a Fender Precision bass. All right, so now fast forwarding a little bit to Detroit, there was a bassist called James Jefferson that had a real big impact on bass. Now, the reason being is because James Jefferson played on a lot of Motown records that involved groups like the Four Tops, the Temptations, Stevie Wonder, hundreds of great artists. And James Jefferson played bass on about 95% of those. I want to give you a little bit of a background on him and his style. Now, coming from the upright bass, a lot of these guys were using techniques like Ray Brown, where they'd play with one finger and play their walking bass lines like this. Well, James Jefferson, fresh out of being a jazz player, kept that technique, and he played all those cool bass lines with one finger. In fact, they call them the hook. And I want to show you a couple of his bass lines that he played in the Motown era using that one hook. And this is a song called Get Ready by the Temptations. It's an easy song. It's in D, and you can check it out and listen to it and play along. All right, so here we go. All right, now I'm playing a bass setup similar to how his would have been. He played a 1962 Fender Precision with a foam mute, flat wound strings, and high action, so he was really digging in. And this is another one of his bass lines that's called The Same Old Song by the Four Tops. And it's kind of cool because it shows how his style expanded and got a little busier, and you can even hear a bit of the jazz walking bass line in this one. It's one of my favorite bass lines ever. It's in C major. So you can hear there, it's got a bit of the arpeggio and scale, kind of like a walking bass line. It's just C, D, E, and then A, and then a G at the bottom. So I want you to try that, and you can even experiment with flat wound strings. I think it's really cool to check out some of the past history of an instrument, even if you just try it for a while and then switch to a more modern approach. I feel that you can really learn from what our predecessors have done. So from there, the hook, as bass progressed, electric bass, they started playing with 2 fingers and getting a little bit faster. Now, bassists like Billy Sheehan of the more modern era would even play with 3 fingers to get certain effects. And even 4 fingers, and some players even play Stanley Clarke. With almost like a flamenco technique where they're shooting their 3rd, 2nd, and 1st finger out and just repeating that over and over like a flamenco guitarist. So there's a lot of different techniques on the electric bass. And speaking of which, I want to show you another one of my favorite techniques, which is a pick. Now, there's a famous bass player in the 60s that played on hundreds and hundreds of recordings like James Jefferson did. And she was actually a guitarist, and one day in the studio, the bass player didn't show up. So they said to Carol, "Do you feel like playing bass?" And she said, "Sure." So she played with her pick a lot of famous bass lines that you probably know. So how she held hers, which was like the jazz guitarist, it's almost like you're kind of like using a screwdriver and screwing in a light bulb, and you just pop the pick in between your thumb and index finger like this. And she would have played a bass line like on Good Vibrations. Kind of like that. She also used a cool thing, which was a felt pad mute on top of the strings that she taped, much like I had here to demonstrate. So there again, I suggest that you experiment with that. Get a piece of felt from the dollar store or a foam mute, put them under the strings, and she claims that it dampens the under and overtones. And so in the studio, she felt it kind of gave you a better bass sound and supported the band better. So I hold the pick a little bit differently. A super simple technique. I just grab it between my thumb and index finger and let these fingers kind of float freely. And I'll demonstrate that with a Beatles bass line called a Day Tripper. All right, so here we go. So you can experiment with that technique too. I want to leave you today with one of my favorite techniques too. And I'm going to fast forward you to the 70s now, to Larry Graham. He was a member of the Sly and the Family Stone band. And he was, as the story has it, he was playing in a trio with his mother, who was also a musician. And they didn't have a drummer in the band with them at that time. So he devised a technique with a bass drum with the thump and the snare drum with a pluck, plucking the string up. Now, I want to demonstrate that technique with a song of the Sly and the Family Stones called "I Want to Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again." All right, it goes a little bit like this. We're going to thump with our thumb the lower part of the bass line and pluck the top string. So it sounds almost like a drum kit plus the bass line. All right, so there's a bit of Larry Graham for you, the father of slapping. Now, quick fundamentals before we finish up today. Get yourself a metronome. You can get it on an app or even an old school metronome from your local music store. And put it on a slow tempo. Practice locking in really nicely and tightly. And speed that up as you get more comfortable with your grooves. And that'll help you lock in with a drummer or guitarist, whoever you're playing with. And if you enter into the studio, that'll help you lock in with the click too if you're doing any recording. All right, so I'm gonna leave you there. Enjoy the bass, and we'll see you in the music.